It's with a very heavy heart that I rise today to join my colleagues in this House to acknowledge the terrible, the atrocious crimes committed in Christchurch just over 2 weeks ago now. I remember very clearly being in Newcastle as the news broke and immediately being very fearful for the constituents of mine that were about to go into Friday prayers in the 2 mosques that I have in Newcastle. And within hours, I can only imagine what it felt like. I got to talk to many of those men and women the following day, fronting up to Friday prayers just really half an hour after the news had sort of broken in Australia of what horrendous crimes had been committed in Christchurch, going into prayer with that really hollow and numb feeling, and just how really terrifying that must have been. I was so amazingly proud of the way in which the Newcastle community responded, and responded really swiftly. The mosque at Mayfield called for a public vigil the following day on the Saturday, and just put it out there on Facebook and asked the community for those that wanted to join them. And I attended that service. It was packed. It was absolutely standing room only inside the mosque, but people spilled out to the common spaces between the mosque and the community areas and out onto the footpaths at the street. And, the people of Newcastle did what we always do best, and that is come together in times of crisis to lend support, to express our profound shock and horror that an Australian citizen, one of our own, had committed profound acts of hatred. And it is difficult to come to terms with the fact that a citizen of ours was, at some point in his life has become radicalised and, felt. I'm not in that headspace. I have actually no comprehension, but could see fit to walk into not just 1 but 2 mosques on that day, and to murder 50 innocent people who were doing nothing but following the practices of their faith. And as we learnt, as the stories came out, of course, all those 50 people were unique individuals in this world. All of them had really deep personal stories to tell, and like all of us, I expect, in this house, the horror of really listening to being able to put a face and a life and a lived experience to every one of those 50 people who were brutally murdered has been a necessary but difficult and confronting exercise, and to know that we stand united as a parliament against the actions of hatred. And I would like to note at this point that the Senate has just in the last 30 minutes censured a certain senator who remains nameless, who made some particularly vile comments in the wake of the Christchurch attacks. And I note that the Senate has, with the support of of bipartisan, indeed multi-party support, has censured, that censure motion has been successful. And of course that motion acknowledged what all of us in this House should, and that is the universal rights of peoples in every part of this planet to exercise a freedom of thought and consciousness and religion, and that right includes freedom, either alone or in a community with others, in private or public places, to manifest the religion and belief and practices. I know There are many of us in this room who've done work around the need to protect those universal rights and freedoms. And so the Senate has, as I said, very strongly supported those universal rights, has called on all Australians to stand united against hate and to publicly and always condemn the actions and comments that are designed absolutely to incite fear and distrust. I note that that censure motion also endorsed a very powerful statement that was issued from the Iman Hassan Centre following the attacks in Christchurch, and that said, and I would like to read that statement to the House because it is a profound set of words, and I will quote it in full. It says, "In times like this, that we lose. It is times like this, that we lose hope and doubt humanity. When people of faith come under attack in such a way, it shows us how low humanity can fall. However, it never ceases to amaze how far humanity can rise after such despicable events." And that statement went on to read, "United as a community, we can overcome these barbaric events wherever they happen. Divided, we become barbaric ourselves, and the innocent lives lost around the world should be a sign for all of us to unite against hate." And I could not express my support more strongly for that statement. If there is one lesson amongst many to be learnt from these vile acts of hatred, it is the responsibility of each and every one of us in this House, in the other, civic leaders across our communities, people of all faiths, people of no faiths, to stand united in calling out acts of hatred. I don't think there is any way to, and nor should we, sugarcoat what has happened in these vile acts, or indeed many others. And that extends to the way that we speak, both in this House and in our communities, to be mindful of the language that is used, to be people who are strong enough to call out filthy, dog-whistling, race-based language. And we haven't. We have failed as a community of leaders to always live up to that standard. There have been despicable things said both within this House and outside from time to time that should have been called out. I hope now that each and every one of us has the courage to stand up to race-based dog-whistling politics. It should have no place in this House or our community. We know now more than ever, perhaps, that dog whistling has consequences. It has profound, hurtful consequences and can never be the default position for desperate politicians. So I commend the Senate for taking these actions today. I think that it is a very important marker for this Parliament that censure motion was successful, that inflammatory and divisive comments that seek to attribute blame to victims of horrific crime and to vilify people on the basis of their race, they do not reflect the opinions of this Parliament. Those comments don't reflect this place at all. And in the same way that the astonishing leadership from the New Zealand Prime Minister Ardern, who made very clear in her reaching out to her community and the hours after the vile acts perpetrated in Christchurch, she made very, very clear that the people who were hurt, who were injured, were very much, they were part of that New Zealand community. They were part of the family. And that the only person that didn't belong in the us category was the perpetrator of those vile acts of hatred. And I think that there are many lessons to be learned by the way in which she was able to conduct herself publicly, the very compassionate approach she took immediately to the survivors and to the families, to the visits to the mosques, the two mosques in which these attacks were made, but went on to reach out to school children who lost friends and neighbours and playmates in those attacks at the mosque. She had time, she had enough love and compassion for each and every citizen, not just citizens of New Zealand, but reaching out to us all. I think, everybody I spoke to in Australia had nothing but praise and and buckets of love in return for the Prime Minister of New Zealand, for the way in which she conducted herself, the way in which she brought her community together, the way in which she insisted that inclusion, that love and compassion would be victorious in the end of the day. That was the glue that bound her community. She understood that and made sure that they were the words that she spoke. As I said, Deputy Speaker, I have two mosques in my community at Newcastle, and I was so profoundly moved to attend the first vigil on the Saturday evenings, within 24 hours of the Christchurch attacks. And as I said, the attendance from the broader Newcastle community was astonishing. People sort of occupied every square piece of every square centimetre of space in the mosque and outside to stand in solidarity with our Muslim brothers and sisters. But it was also, as I said, important. I was joined there in speaking with the Catholic bishop, the Anglican bishops, the Superintendent Brett Greentree of the New South Wales Police, of community members from all faiths who were united, standing in solidarity, as I said, with our Muslim brothers and sisters, but united in our condemnation of acts of hatred, of vile acts of hatred, and recommitting ourselves to being those leaders who would stand up and speak out when hatred, discriminatory behaviours are perpetrated in our community. I'd like to pay a special sort of tribute to the leaders of the mosque in Mayfield. There was the Newcastle Muslim Sheikh Hamid, and the Centre's Secretary Farouk Durrani, who have been astonishing leaders in our community. And as I said, the Catholic Bishop Bill Wright, the Anglican Bishop Dr. Peter Stewart, and the Newcastle City Police District Superintendent Brett Greentree, who called out that, Islamophobia and hatred have absolutely no place in our community, and we were all recommitting ourselves to calling that out at every opportunity. And I would also just like to acknowledge the mosque in Wallsend, in the western part of my electorate, where we gathered again the following day on the Sunday to, under the very careful and embracing watch of all of the leadership at the Newcastle Muslim Association, Sheikh Mohammed Khamis, who's really articulated that the trauma being experienced on that day at the Wallsend Mosque wasn't just for Muslims alone, but affected us all as a community. And I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the Uniting Church Reverend then, Neil Smith, my state colleagues, Sonia Hornery and Tim Crackenthorpe, that joined me at the Mayfield Mosque and the Walsham Mosque, and the school principals, and just thousands of community members who stood united in saying this type of hatred has no place in our community. And as I said, it was a very heavy heart going into those, but it was the strength that is to be gained from an understanding of our common humanity, and the fact that we have all been, very brutally reminded of the need to redouble our efforts. That is some good to come from an otherwise horrific attack on our brothers and our sisters. And I join with all of our colleagues in the House in condemning those actions and for making sure we're a better society and a better group of leaders in the wake. Thank you.